The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete parade ground at Fort Benning, Georgia. Staff Sergeant Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez had been walking these same grounds for 12 years, and every step reminded him of the respect he had earned through blood, sweat, and countless deployments. At 34, his withered face told stories of 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. The scars on his knuckles weren't from bar fights, they were from real combat, from moments when survival meant everything. Tank adjusted his uniform with practiced precision. Every crease was perfect, every badge positioned exactly where regulations demanded. His chest carried the weight of numerous ribbons, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Combat Action Badge, and others that spoke of a soldier who had seen the worst of war and emerged stronger. He wore them not as decoration, but as proof of his dedication to the green machine that had shaped him into who he was today. The base was buzzing with the arrival of new recruits fresh from basic training. Tank watched them stumble off the transport buses, their uniforms still crisp and new, their faces carrying that mixture of excitement and terror that came with joining a real unit for the first time. He remembered his own first day, how overwhelming everything seemed, how desperately he wanted to prove himself worthy of wearing the uniform. But times were different now. These new soldiers came from a generation Tank didn't understand. They had grown up with smartphones and social media, with participation trophies and safe spaces. They talked about feelings and mental health in ways that made Tank uncomfortable. In his day, soldiers dealt with problems by pushing through them, not by talking them to death in some counselor's office. Among the new arrivals, one soldier immediately caught Tank's attention for all the wrong reasons. Private Sarah Chin stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, her slight frame almost swimming in her Army combat uniform. She couldn't weigh more than 120 pounds soaking wet. Her black hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her dark eyes surveyed the base with what Tank interpreted as arrogance rather than curiosity. What irritated Tank most wasn't her size, he had served with plenty of smaller soldiers who proved themselves capable. It was the way she carried herself, the confidence in her posture that seemed unearned. She moved with a fluidity that suggested some kind of martial arts background, but Tank had seen plenty of soldiers who thought their high school karate classes made them fighters. Real combat was different. Real war was different. Tank had read through the incoming personnel files the night before. Private Chen's record was impressive on paper, top of her class in basic training, expert marksmanship qualification, high scores on physical fitness tests, and recommendations from multiple instructors. But Tank had learned not to trust paper accomplishments. The real test came when bullets started flying, when soldiers faced life and death decisions in the middle of chaos and confusion. What really bothered Tank about Chen's file was the note about her civilian background. She had spent 4 years studying some kind of martial art called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu before enlisting. Tank had encountered soldiers before who thought their civilian fighting experience translated to military effectiveness. In his experience, it usually meant they had an attitude problem and needed to be brought down to earth quickly. The Army had changed during Tank's career, and not always for the better in his opinion. When he had enlisted, drill sergeants could still put their hands on recruits who stepped out of line. Physical training was about pushing soldiers to their absolute limits and beyond. Now everything was about preventing injuries, avoiding lawsuits, and making sure everyone felt included and valued. Tank understood the reasoning behind these changes, but he worried they were creating softer soldiers. In Afghanistan, he had watched too many young soldiers freeze up during their first firefight because they had never truly been tested beyond their comfort zone. The enemy didn't care about anyone's feelings or self-esteem. Combat was about violence and brutality, about who could be more ruthless when everything was on the line. As the new recruits gathered in formation for their initial briefing, Tank positioned himself where he could observe Chen more closely. She stood at attention with perfect posture, her eyes focused straight ahead with military bearing that was technically correct but somehow felt rehearsed to Tank. He had seen too many soldiers who could look the part during garrison duty but fell apart when real pressure was applied. First Sergeant Williams began the standard welcome speech, explaining unit expectations, base policies, and the chain of command. Tank barely listened to words he had heard dozens of times before. Instead, he studied the new soldiers' reactions, looking for signs of who might become problems and who might actually contribute to the unit's mission. Chen's expression remained unchanged throughout the briefing, even when First Sergeant Williams mentioned the unit's upcoming deployment to eastern Syria. Other new soldiers shifted nervously or exchanged worried glances, but Chen might as well have been listening to a weather report. Tank found this composure suspicious. Either she was too inexperienced to understand what deployment meant, or she was putting on an act to impress everyone around her. After the briefing, Tank made his way to the administrative building to review training schedules and duty assignments. As the senior non-commissioned officer in charge of training new personnel, he had significant input on how quickly soldiers were integrated into regular duties. He believed in a tough but fair approach: push soldiers hard enough to reveal their true capabilities, but provide the guidance they needed to improve. The training program Tank had developed over the years was designed to identify potential problems early. New soldiers went through intensive physical training, weapons familiarization, field exercises, and combat scenarios that tested not just their technical skills but their mental toughness. Tank had seen too many soldiers who looked good in basic training but couldn't handle the stress of real military operations. Chen was assigned to Tank's training group along with 7 other new arrivals. As he reviewed their files, Tank noticed that 4 of the 8 were women, which was becoming increasingly common in combat units. Tank had no problem with female soldiers in principle. He had served alongside several outstanding women during his deployments. But he also knew that some female recruits expected special treatment or believed they could get by on lower standards. The integration of women into combat roles had been one of the most significant changes during Tank's career. He had watched the debates in Congress, the policy changes from Pentagon leadership, and the gradual shift in military culture. Some changes had been positive, bringing talented personnel into roles where they could contribute effectively. But Tank worried that political correctness sometimes prevented honest assessments of individual capabilities. Tank's own attitude toward female soldiers had been shaped by real combat experience. In Iraq, he had served with Sergeant Maria Santos, a communications specialist who had saved his unit during a complex ambush by maintaining radio contact under heavy fire. Santos never asked for special treatment and never used her gender as an excuse. She earned Tank's respect through her actions, just like any other soldier. But Tank had also encountered female soldiers who seemed to think their presence in a combat unit was statement enough. They complained about physical standards they couldn't meet, demanded accommodations for issues male soldiers were expected to handle without assistance, and sometimes used accusations of sexism to deflect criticism of their performance. Tank prided himself on treating all soldiers equally, regardless of gender, race, or background. His standards were high for everyone, and he expected every soldier under his command to meet those standards without excuses. In his view, war didn't offer different challenges based on who someone was. Bullets killed everyone the same way, and the enemy didn't care about anyone's personal circumstances. Chen's martial arts background continued to bother Tank as he planned the week's training schedule. He had encountered several soldiers over the years who thought their civilian fighting experience made them experts on combat. Usually, these soldiers needed to learn the difference between controlled sparring and the chaos of real violence. Tank had developed specific training scenarios designed to humble overconfident soldiers and teach them the importance of teamwork and following orders. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was something Tank knew about but had never practiced. He understood it was a grappling art focused on ground fighting and submissions. While these skills might be useful in certain situations, Tank believed they could create dangerous overconfidence in soldiers who hadn't experienced real combat. In war, fights weren't controlled matches with rules and referees. They were desperate struggles where anything could happen and survival depended on aggression, training, and luck. Tank decided that Chen would need special attention during training to ensure her civilian background didn't interfere with learning proper military procedures. He had seen too many soldiers who thought they already knew everything waste valuable training time trying to prove their competence instead of focusing on improving their weaknesses. The next morning, Tank arrived at the training facility before dawn to prepare for the new soldiers' first day of unit training. The gym was a converted warehouse with wrestling mats, weight equipment, and space for combatives training. Tank had spent countless hours in similar facilities throughout his career, perfecting techniques and maintaining the physical conditioning that kept him alive in combat. As the new soldiers filtered in for their first training session, Tank observed their interactions and body language. Chen moved with the same quiet confidence he had noticed the day before, but she didn't seem to be trying to impress anyone or draw attention to herself. She spoke politely with other soldiers when addressed but didn't volunteer information about her background or capabilities. Tank had planned the first week's training to include physical fitness testing, basic combatives instruction, weapons handling, and team-building exercises. His goal was to establish a baseline for each soldier's capabilities while beginning the process of molding them into an effective unit. The Army Combatives program provided a standardized approach to hand-to-hand combat training, but Tank supplemented it with techniques he had learned through practical experience. The morning began with physical training designed to test the new soldiers' conditioning and mental toughness. Tank led them through a series of exercises that progressively increased in difficulty: push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, sprints, and obstacle courses. He watched carefully as each soldier approached their physical limits, looking for signs of who would push through discomfort and who would give up when things became difficult. Chen performed well during physical training, completing every exercise without complaint and maintaining good form even as fatigue set in. Tank had to admit her conditioning was impressive for someone her size, but he had seen plenty of soldiers who were strong in the gym but couldn't apply that strength effectively in combat situations. After physical training, Tank gathered the new soldiers for their first combatives instruction. The Army Combatives program was designed to teach soldiers practical fighting skills while building confidence and aggression. Tank had been an instructor in the program for several years and believed strongly in its effectiveness when taught correctly. "Combat is not about fighting fair," Tank began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had experienced real violence. "It's about surviving when someone is trying to kill you. The techniques we'll teach you are designed to end fights quickly and decisively. This isn't a sport or a game. This is about staying alive so you can come home to your families." Tank demonstrated several basic techniques: escapes from common grabs, simple strikes, and defensive positions. He emphasized the importance of aggression and commitment in applying these techniques. In his experience, soldiers who hesitated or held back during training usually froze up when faced with real danger. As the soldiers paired up to practice the techniques Tank had demonstrated, he moved among them offering corrections and encouragement. Most of the new arrivals struggled with the coordination required to execute techniques properly under pressure. Their movements were stiff and tentative, lacking the fluidity that came with confidence and experience. Chen, however, moved differently than the other soldiers. When paired with Private Johnson, a larger soldier fresh from infantry training, she demonstrated the techniques with a precision that caught Tank's attention. Her movements were economical and efficient, lacking the wasted motion that characterized beginners. When Johnson tried to grab her, she avoided his grasp easily and countered with controlled but effective techniques. Tank watched this interaction with growing irritation. Chen wasn't showing off or trying to dominate her training partner, but her competence highlighted the difference between her civilian experience and military training. Tank worried that other soldiers might defer to her experience instead of learning proper army techniques and procedures. After an hour of basic instruction, Tank decided to demonstrate some of the more advanced techniques that soldiers might encounter during deployment. He had learned these techniques through necessity during combat operations, adapting standard army training to deal with specific threats his unit had faced in Afghanistan and Iraq. "Private Chen," Tank called out, his voice carrying across the training area. "Since you seem comfortable with these techniques, why don't you help me demonstrate some defensive scenarios?" Chen approached with the same calm confidence she had displayed since arriving at the unit. Tank noticed that other soldiers stopped their own training to watch, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The atmosphere in the room shifted from routine instruction to focused attention. Tank positioned himself facing Chen, adopting an aggressive stance that he had used many times during actual combat operations. His intention was to demonstrate the difference between controlled civilian training and the chaotic violence of real fighting. He wanted to show the other soldiers why they needed to take military combatives training seriously, even if they had previous martial arts experience. "In combat, you won't have time to think," Tank explained to the watching soldiers while maintaining eye contact with Chen. "Your training has to be automatic, instinctive. When someone attacks you, you have seconds to respond effectively or you die." Without further warning, Tank lunged forward with a grab designed to simulate an enemy soldier attempting to control Chen's weapon arm. His movement was fast and aggressive, backed by 12 years of military training and combat experience. Tank expected Chen to struggle against his superior size and strength, providing a teachable moment about the difference between theory and practice. Instead, Chen's response was so quick and fluid that Tank barely had time to register what was happening. She stepped slightly offline from his attack, her left hand controlling his grabbing arm while her right hand established a grip on his uniform. Before Tank could adjust his position or counter her movement, she had used his own momentum against him, executing what he would later learn was called a judo throw. Tank found himself airborne for what felt like an eternity but was probably less than a second. His 12 years of combat experience couldn't help him as gravity took control and Chen guided his landing with precision. He hit the mat hard but safely, the wind knocked out of him as much by surprise as by impact. The training facility fell completely silent. 8 new soldiers and several instructors who had been conducting other training sessions stared in disbelief at the sight of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez lying on his back while Private Chen stood over him, her posture relaxed but ready. Tank's first emotion wasn't anger or embarrassment, it was shock. In 12 years of military service, through 3 combat deployments and countless training exercises, he had never been so completely outmaneuvered by another soldier. The technique Chen had used wasn't flashy or complicated, but it had been perfectly timed and executed with a level of skill that spoke of years of serious training. As Tank got to his feet, his mind raced through what had just happened. He had attacked with full commitment and aggression, expecting his size and experience to overwhelm a much smaller opponent. Instead, Chen had used his own energy against him, turning his strength into a weakness with what appeared to be minimal effort. The implications of what had just occurred began to sink in as Tank faced Chen in the aftermath of their brief encounter. This wasn't just a lucky technique or a fluke result. Chen had demonstrated a level of skill that suggested her civilian martial arts training was far more advanced than Tank had assumed. More importantly, she had remained completely calm under pressure, showing the kind of composure that usually only came with significant experience. "Good technique, Private," Tank said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his thoughts. "Class dismissed. Report back here at 1,400 hours for weapons training." As the soldiers filed out of the training facility, Tank remained behind to process what had happened. For the first time in his military career, he found himself questioning assumptions he had held for years about combat effectiveness, training, and what it meant to be a warrior. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the firing range as Tank prepared for weapons training with his new soldiers. The familiar smell of gunpowder and hot metal filled the air, bringing back memories of countless hours spent perfecting marksmanship skills that had kept him alive in multiple combat zones. Tank had always found solace at the firing range. Here, skill was measured in precise, objective terms that left no room for doubt or interpretation. Tank arrived early to inspect the M4 carbines and ammunition that would be used during training. Each weapon had to be checked for proper function and cleanliness before being issued to soldiers. This attention to detail wasn't just military protocol. Tank had seen too many weapons malfunctions in combat to take any chances with equipment maintenance. As he worked through the inspection process, Tank's mind kept returning to the morning's events in the combatives training facility. The memory of being thrown by Private Chen felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. Tank prided himself on learning from every experience, but this situation challenged fundamental assumptions he had held about combat effectiveness and military hierarchy. Tank's initial anger had given way to a grudging curiosity about Chen's background and capabilities. The technique she had used was clearly the product of years of serious training, not the casual martial arts dabbling Tank had assumed from reading her personnel file. Her composure during and after the encounter suggested someone accustomed to physical confrontation, which contradicted Tank's expectations about civilian martial artists. The other soldiers began arriving for weapons training, their conversations stopping abruptly when they noticed Tank's presence. Word of the morning's incident had clearly spread throughout the unit, creating an undercurrent of tension that Tank could feel even without hearing specific discussions. Military gossip traveled faster than official communications, and Tank knew that dozens of soldiers would know about his encounter with Chen before the day ended. Chen arrived precisely on time, her uniform immaculate and her bearing professional. She showed no signs of smugness or self-satisfaction about the morning's events, which Tank found both impressive and irritating. Part of him had expected her to display some hint of pride or superiority, which would have given him justification for treating her more harshly during training. Instead, Chen approached weapons training with the same quiet professionalism she had shown since arriving at the unit. She listened carefully to Tank's safety briefings, followed all procedures exactly as demonstrated, and showed proper respect for the weapons and training environment. Tank had to admit that her military bearing was excellent, even if her combat skills were unexpectedly advanced. Tank began the afternoon's training with a detailed safety briefing about range procedures and weapons handling. Safety on military firing ranges was absolute. A single mistake could result in serious injury or death. Tank had seen accidents during his career caused by soldiers who became careless or overconfident around firearms, and he insisted on perfect adherence to safety protocols. "These weapons will kill you just as easily as they'll kill the enemy," Tank explained to the assembled soldiers. "Treat every weapon as if it's loaded, never point the muzzle at anything you don't intend to destroy, and keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. These rules aren't suggestions, they're the difference between going home alive and going home in a box." Tank watched carefully as each soldier handled their assigned weapon for the first time. The M4 carbine was lighter than the M16 rifle Tank had trained with early in his career, but it required the same respect and attention to detail. Some soldiers displayed natural comfort with firearms, while others showed obvious nervousness that would require additional coaching to overcome. Chen handled her weapon with competent familiarity, checking the chamber and conducting basic functions checks with movements that suggested previous experience. Tank made a mental note to review her civilian background more thoroughly. Many states had competitive shooting programs that could provide excellent foundational training for military marksmanship. The firing range at Fort Benning was a sophisticated facility with electronic targets that provided immediate feedback on shot placement and accuracy. Tank preferred this modern equipment to the older paper targets because it allowed for more detailed analysis of each soldier's performance and specific areas needing improvement. Tank divided the soldiers into pairs for initial marksmanship training, with each pair sharing a firing lane and alternating between shooting and observing. This arrangement allowed soldiers to learn from watching others while ensuring constant supervision during live fire exercises. Tank positioned himself where he could observe all firing lanes simultaneously and provide immediate feedback on technique and performance. The first phase of marksmanship training focused on basic shooting positions and sight alignment. Tank demonstrated proper stance, grip, and breathing techniques that formed the foundation of accurate shooting. These fundamentals were essential because poor habits learned early were extremely difficult to correct later in a soldier's career. "Marksmanship is about consistency," Tank explained as he demonstrated proper shooting stance. "Every shot should be exactly the same stance, same grip, same sight picture, same trigger control. When you can repeat these fundamentals automatically, accuracy becomes natural." Tank had each soldier fire groups of shots at 25-meter targets to establish baseline accuracy and identify specific areas needing improvement. Some soldiers struggled with basic concepts like sight alignment or trigger control, while others displayed natural ability that required only minor adjustments to achieve excellent results. Chen's performance at the firing range was as technically proficient as Tank had expected based on her personnel file. Her shot groups were tight and centered, demonstrating excellent fundamentals and steady hand control. Tank observed her technique carefully, looking for flaws or shortcuts that might indicate incomplete training, but found her approach to be methodical and well-developed. What impressed Tank most about Chen's marksmanship wasn't just her accuracy, but her consistency across multiple shot groups. Many soldiers could fire one or two good groups through concentration and luck, but maintaining that performance required genuine skill and experience. Chen's ability to repeat accurate shot placement suggested extensive practice beyond basic military qualification requirements. After completing initial accuracy assessments, Tank introduced more challenging shooting scenarios designed to test soldiers under pressure. These exercises included timed firing sequences, multiple target engagement, and shooting from various positions that soldiers might encounter during combat operations. Tank had developed these training scenarios based on his own combat experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. In real firefights, soldiers rarely had the luxury of perfect shooting conditions or unlimited time to engage targets. Training had to prepare soldiers for the confusion, stress, and time pressure they would face when lives depended on accurate shooting. In combat, you don't get second chances, Tank explained as he prepared the soldiers for rapid-fire exercises. Your first shot might be the only shot you get before the enemy takes cover or returns fire. These drills will teach you to make that first shot count under pressure. The rapid-fire exercises revealed significant differences in each soldier's ability to perform under stress. Some soldiers who had shot accurately during slow-fire exercises struggled to maintain precision when time pressure was added. Others maintained their accuracy but fired too slowly to be effective in realistic combat scenarios. Chen adapted to the increased pressure without apparent difficulty, maintaining both speed and accuracy throughout the rapid-fire exercises. Tank noticed that she had developed efficient movement patterns between targets and shooting positions that minimized wasted time while maintaining proper technique. This level of tactical proficiency suggested training beyond standard civilian shooting instruction. As the afternoon progressed, Tank found himself paying closer attention to Chen's overall approach to training rather than just her performance on specific exercises. She approached each new challenge methodically, listening carefully to instructions and asking clarifying questions when necessary. Most importantly, she showed the same attention to detail and safety consciousness that Tank demanded from all soldiers under his command. Tank's assessment of Chen was complicated by his growing recognition that his initial assumptions had been wrong. Her martial arts background wasn't a liability or sign of overconfidence, it was evidence of serious commitment to physical training and mental discipline. Her civilian shooting experience wasn't casual hobby participation, it represented significant skill development that translated directly to military requirements. The final exercise of the day involved combat shooting scenarios where soldiers had to engage multiple targets while moving between cover positions. This type of training required integration of marksmanship skills with tactical movement and decision-making under pressure. Tank considered it the most realistic preparation for actual combat conditions that could be safely conducted on a military firing range. Tank demonstrated the course of fire, moving smoothly between positions while engaging targets at various ranges. His movements were economical and purposeful, developed through years of combat experience where unnecessary exposure to enemy fire could be fatal. The demonstration took less than 2 minutes, but it showcased integration of multiple skills that took most soldiers months to develop. Chen completed the combat shooting exercise with performance that surprised even Tank. Her movement between positions was fluid and efficient, her target engagement was quick and accurate, and her overall time was competitive with experienced soldiers who had been training for years. Tank had to acknowledge that her civilian training had provided an excellent foundation for military applications. As weapons training concluded for the day, Tank gathered the soldiers for an after-action review and equipment accountability. Every weapon had to be cleaned, inspected, and properly secured before soldiers could be dismissed. This process required attention to detail and teamwork that reinforced military discipline and standards. Tank watched Chen clean her weapon with the same methodical approach she had shown throughout the day's training. Her disassembly and cleaning procedures were correct and efficient, suggesting familiarity with firearms maintenance that went beyond basic instruction. Tank found himself grudgingly impressed by her overall competence and professional attitude. The evening brought time for Tank to review training records and prepare reports on each soldier's performance. His office was a small, cluttered space filled with training manuals, personnel files, and photographs from various deployments. Tank used this time to analyze the day's events and plan future training based on each soldier's demonstrated strengths and weaknesses. Tank's report on Chen's performance required careful consideration. Military efficiency reports were permanent records that could significantly impact a soldier's career advancement and future assignments. Tank prided himself on writing honest, accurate assessments that provided useful information for other leaders who might work with these soldiers. Chen's technical performance during both combatives and weapons training had been excellent by any standard. Her military bearing and attitude were exemplary, and she had integrated well with other soldiers in her training group. Tank struggled with how to address the morning's combatives demonstration without making it appear that Chen had somehow been insubordinate or inappropriate. Tank decided to focus his report on Chen's demonstrated competence and potential for leadership development. Her civilian training had clearly provided valuable skills that enhanced her military effectiveness, and her professional attitude suggested someone who could be trusted with increased responsibility. Tank's personal embarrassment about being thrown during combatives training wasn't relevant to Chen's official evaluation. As Tank completed his paperwork, he found himself reconsidering many assumptions he had held about military training and soldier development. Chen's background had challenged his beliefs about the value of civilian martial arts training and the relationship between physical skills and military effectiveness. Tank began to wonder how many other talented soldiers he might have underestimated based on superficial characteristics or prejudgments. The next morning brought news that would significantly impact Tank's relationship with Chen and the rest of his training group. First Sergeant Williams called Tank into his office for a discussion about training priorities and unit readiness requirements. The conversation would force Tank to confront the implications of Chen's demonstrated capabilities and his own leadership responsibilities. Tank entered First Sergeant Williams' office with the mixture of confidence and caution that characterized his interactions with senior leadership. Williams was a 20-year veteran who had earned Tank's respect through competent leadership and genuine concern for soldier welfare. Their relationship was built on mutual trust and shared commitment to training excellence. "I heard about yesterday's combatives training," Williams began without preamble. "Word is that one of your new soldiers put on quite a demonstration. Tell me what happened from your perspective." Tank had anticipated this conversation and prepared his response carefully. Military leadership required honest communication about training events, especially those that might impact unit morale or effectiveness. Tank chose to focus on Chen's demonstrated competence rather than his own surprise at being thrown. Private Chen displayed advanced martial arts skills during combatives instruction, Tank reported formally. Her technique and composure suggest significant civilian training that could be valuable for unit readiness. I recommend additional assessment to determine how her skills might be integrated into our training program. Williams nodded thoughtfully, his expression revealing years of experience dealing with complicated personnel situations. I've seen Chen's personnel file, and there are some interesting details about her background that weren't included in the standard briefing materials. Her civilian instructor submitted a letter of recommendation that suggests her training was more extensive than we initially realized. Tank felt a familiar mixture of curiosity and concern as Williams continued explaining Chen's background. Military personnel files sometimes contain surprises that could significantly impact how soldiers were utilized within their units. Tank had learned to expect the unexpected when dealing with soldiers who had diverse civilian experiences before enlisting. Williams opened Chen's expanded personnel file and began reading details that hadn't been included in Tank's initial review. Private Chen trained for 6 years at a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu academy in California before enlisting. She competed nationally and earned a purple belt, which apparently represents significant achievement in that particular martial art. Her instructor describes her as one of the most technically proficient students he's trained. Tank absorbed this information while reconsidering his assessment of Chen's capabilities. A purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu represented years of serious training and competition against skilled opponents. Tank realized he had significantly underestimated both Chen's experience level and the applicability of her civilian training to military requirements. Williams continued reading from Chen's file, revealing additional background information that painted a picture of someone with much more diverse experience than Tank had imagined. She also worked as a civilian firearms instructor at several shooting ranges in California, specializing in tactical shooting courses for law enforcement and security personnel. Her civilian shooting credentials include several instructor certifications and competition achievements. Tank's understanding of Chen's background shifted dramatically as Williams shared these details. Her performance during weapons training suddenly made perfect sense. She hadn't just been a casual recreational shooter, but a professional instructor with extensive experience teaching tactical shooting skills. Tank felt both impressed by her qualifications and somewhat embarrassed by his initial dismissive attitude. "There's one more thing," Williams added, his tone becoming more serious. "Private Chen enlisted specifically to join Special Operations Forces. She's already been accepted for the Special Forces Assessment and Selection course, pending completion of her initial unit training requirements. She's not just another soldier passing through our unit, she's someone with the potential to represent the Army at the highest levels of military service. This revelation completely changed Tank's understanding of Chen's motivations and future prospects. Special Forces soldiers were among the Army's elite, selected and trained to operate independently in the most challenging environments. The fact that Chen had already been accepted for assessment suggested that senior leadership recognized her potential for exceptional service. Tank realized that his role in Chen's training had implications beyond just unit readiness. He was preparing someone who might soon be representing the Army's most elite forces. This responsibility required a different approach than standard soldier training, focusing on advanced skills development rather than just basic competency achievement. The revelation about Chen's Special Forces aspirations forced Tank to completely reconsider his approach to her training and development. As he left First Sergeant Williams' office, Tank's mind raced with implications he hadn't previously considered. Special Forces candidates required a level of preparation that went far beyond standard unit training, and Tank suddenly found himself responsible for ensuring Chen was ready for one of the military's most demanding selection processes. Tank spent the evening researching Special Forces assessment and selection requirements to better understand what Chen would face during the course. The program was designed to identify soldiers with the physical stamina, mental toughness, and leadership potential necessary for unconventional warfare operations. Success rates were notoriously low, with many highly qualified candidates failing to meet the program's demanding standards. The physical requirements alone were daunting. Candidates had to complete multiple timed marches carrying heavy loads, navigate complex obstacle courses, and demonstrate endurance that pushed human performance to its limits. Beyond physical challenges, the program tested decision-making under extreme stress, leadership capability in ambiguous situations, and the psychological resilience necessary for operating behind enemy lines. Tank realized that Chen's martial arts background might actually be ideal preparation for Special Forces training. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu emphasized problem-solving under pressure, maintaining composure during physical confrontation, and adapting techniques to overcome larger, stronger opponents. These skills translated directly to the mental and physical challenges Chen would face during selection. Tank's own career path had included consideration of Special Forces training early in his military service. He had ultimately chosen to focus on conventional infantry operations, but he retained deep respect for Special Forces soldiers and their unique capabilities. The opportunity to help prepare a soldier for Special Forces selection represented both a significant responsibility and a chance to contribute to the Army's most elite forces. The next morning, Tank called Chen into his office for a private discussion about her career goals and training requirements. Tank wanted to understand Chen's motivations for pursuing Special Forces and assess her realistic chances of success. More importantly, he needed to modify her training program to address specific skills and challenges she would face during selection. Chen entered Tank's office with the same professional bearing she had displayed since arriving at the unit. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture confident but respectful, and her expression attentive. Tank gestured for her to take a seat and prepared to have the kind of honest conversation that could significantly impact a soldier's career trajectory. "Private Chen, First Sergeant Williams informed me about your acceptance for Special Forces assessment and selection," Tank began, studying Chen's reaction carefully. "This is a significant opportunity that very few soldiers receive. I want to understand your motivations and ensure you're properly prepared for what you'll face during the course." Chen's response was measured and thoughtful, revealing preparation and self-awareness that impressed Tank. "Staff Sergeant, I enlisted specifically to pursue Special Forces training because I believe my skills and background can contribute to unconventional warfare operations. My martial arts training taught me to think strategically under pressure, and my firearms instruction experience gave me perspective on teaching complex skills to diverse personnel." Tank appreciated Chen's directness and the clear connection she drew between her civilian background and military objectives. Many soldiers pursued Special Forces for less substantial reasons, seeking prestige, adventure, or validation rather than genuine commitment to the mission. Chen's answer suggested someone who had carefully considered both the opportunities and challenges of Special Forces service.
Special Forces selection is designed to break most candidates, Tank explained bluntly. The physical challenges are just the beginning. The program tests your ability to lead, make decisions under extreme stress, and maintain effectiveness when everything around you is falling apart. Your civilian training gives you advantages, but it also means you'll be held to higher standards from the beginning. Tank outlined the specific areas where Chen's current training program could be modified to better prepare her for selection. Physical conditioning needed to emphasize load-bearing endurance and long-distance movement rather than just general fitness. Leadership training should focus on small unit tactics and decision-making under ambiguous conditions. Mental preparation had to address the psychological challenges of prolonged stress and uncertainty. Chen listened carefully to Tank's recommendations, asking clarifying questions that demonstrated both intelligence and genuine interest in maximizing her preparation. Tank found himself increasingly impressed by her approach to professional development. She seemed to understand that success would require systematic preparation rather than relying solely on natural ability or previous training. Tank decided to implement a modified training program for Chen that would address Special Forces requirements while maintaining her integration with other new soldiers. This approach required balancing individual development with unit cohesion, ensuring that Chen's advanced preparation didn't create resentment or division within the training group. The modified program included additional physical training sessions focused on load-bearing exercises and long-distance movement with equipment. Chen would participate in standard unit training during regular hours, then complete supplementary preparation during evening and weekend periods. Tank volunteered to personally supervise these additional training sessions to ensure they met Special Forces preparation standards. Tank also arranged for Chen to receive additional weapons training beyond standard unit requirements. Special Forces soldiers needed proficiency with a wider variety of weapons systems, including foreign weapons they might encounter during overseas operations. Tank contacted the base armory to arrange access to additional training weapons and ammunition for specialized instruction. The enhanced training program began immediately, with Chen participating in her first supplementary physical training session that same evening. Tank had designed a workout that combined load-bearing exercises with tactical movement, simulating some of the physical challenges she would face during selection. The session took place after normal duty hours, when the training facilities were less crowded and Tank could provide more individualized instruction. Tank watched carefully as Chen completed the first enhanced training session, looking for signs of how she responded to increased physical demands and individual attention. The workout was deliberately challenging, designed to test her current fitness level while building the specific physical capabilities she would need for Special Forces training. Chen approached the enhanced training with the same methodical intensity Tank had observed during her standard unit training. She completed each exercise without complaint, maintained proper form despite increasing fatigue, and demonstrated the kind of mental toughness that suggested good prospects for selection success. Tank found himself genuinely optimistic about her chances of completing the program successfully. After completing the physical training portion of the enhanced session, Tank introduced tactical exercises designed to develop leadership and decision-making skills under pressure. These scenarios required Chen to analyze complex situations, develop action plans, and adapt to changing conditions while managing time pressure and resource constraints. Tank had developed these exercises based on his own combat experience and his understanding of Special Forces operational requirements. The scenarios included elements of ambiguity and incomplete information that forced candidates to make decisions based on limited data and changing circumstances. Success required both analytical thinking and intuitive judgment that couldn't be taught through conventional instruction. Chen's performance during tactical exercises revealed strengths and areas needing development that Tank hadn't previously identified. Her analytical abilities were excellent, she quickly grasped complex situations and developed logical approaches to solving problems. However, her decision-making sometimes showed hesitation that might become problematic under extreme pressure. Tank provided immediate feedback after each exercise, explaining the reasoning behind his assessments and offering specific recommendations for improvement. This type of detailed coaching required significant time investment, but Tank believed it was necessary to maximize Chen's prospects for selection success. More importantly, he found himself genuinely invested in helping her achieve her professional goals.
Over the following weeks, Tank's relationship with Chen evolved from skeptical supervisor to committed mentor. Her consistent performance, professional attitude, and genuine commitment to improvement had earned Tank's respect and support. Tank began to see Chen's success as a reflection of his own effectiveness as a trainer and leader.
The enhanced training program also had unexpected benefits for the rest of Tank's training group.
Other soldiers observed Chen's dedication to additional preparation and began requesting opportunities to participate in supplementary training sessions. Tank realized that Chen's example was raising performance standards for the entire group, creating a positive competition that benefited everyone involved. Tank expanded the enhanced training program to include other motivated soldiers from his training group, while maintaining individual focus on Chen's Special Forces preparation. This approach allowed Tank to provide advanced training opportunities without creating division or resentment within the unit. Several soldiers expressed interest in pursuing their own Special Forces or other elite unit opportunities. As Chen's departure date for Special Forces assessment and selection approached, Tank felt a mixture of pride and concern about her readiness. The additional training had clearly improved her physical conditioning and tactical skills, but selection success would ultimately depend on factors beyond any individual's preparation. Tank had done everything possible to maximize Chen's chances, but the outcome would depend on her performance under conditions no training could fully replicate. Tank arranged for Chen's final training evaluation to include senior leadership observation and feedback. This assessment would provide an external perspective on her readiness and identify any remaining areas needing attention. Tank wanted to ensure that Chen received the most comprehensive preparation possible before facing the challenges of Special Forces selection. First Sergeant Williams and Captain Morrison, the company commander, observed Chen's final evaluation exercises with Tank providing commentary on her development over the previous months. The evaluation included physical fitness testing, weapons proficiency demonstration, tactical problem-solving exercises, and leadership scenarios that tested her ability to perform under pressure. Chen's performance during the final evaluation exceeded Tank's already high expectations. Her physical conditioning was excellent, her weapon skills were advanced, and her tactical decision-making showed significant improvement from her initial assessments. Most importantly, she demonstrated the kind of composure and adaptability that suggested good prospects for handling the stress of Special Forces selection. Captain Morrison's feedback after the evaluation was overwhelmingly positive, with particular praise for Chen's professional development and Tank's training program modifications. Morrison noted that Chen's preparation appeared comparable to soldiers with much more military experience, crediting both her individual effort and Tank's mentoring approach. First Sergeant Williams added his own assessment, emphasizing Chen's potential for representing the unit and the Army with distinction during Special Forces training. Williams noted that Chen's success would reflect positively on the unit's training programs and Tank's effectiveness as a developer of military talent. The final weeks before Chen's departure were filled with administrative preparations and final training sessions. Tank worked with Chen to ensure she had all required equipment and documentation for Special Forces training, while continuing tactical exercises designed to maintain her peak performance level. Tank found himself reflecting on the unexpected journey his relationship with Chen had taken over the previous months. His initial skepticism about her civilian background had given way to genuine respect for her abilities and commitment. More importantly, Tank had learned valuable lessons about the importance of keeping an open mind when assessing soldiers and the potential benefits of diverse training backgrounds. Chen's civilian martial arts training had proven to be an asset rather than a liability, providing mental and physical preparation that enhanced her military development. Tank realized that his own prejudices about civilian martial artists had prevented him from recognizing valuable skills and perspectives that could benefit military training programs. Tank also recognized that his mentoring relationship with Chen had improved his own effectiveness as a leader and trainer. The challenge of preparing someone for Special Forces selection had forced Tank to expand his own knowledge and develop new training approaches that benefited other soldiers as well. As Chen's departure date arrived, Tank felt confident that he had provided the best preparation possible while acknowledging that success would ultimately depend on her individual performance during the selection process. Tank had learned to respect Chen's abilities and was genuinely invested in her success, both as a reflection of his training effectiveness and as recognition of her potential contribution to Special Forces operations. The night before Chen's departure, Tank arranged for an informal farewell gathering with other soldiers from her training group. This event provided an opportunity for Chen to receive encouragement and support from fellow soldiers while reinforcing the unit's culture of mutual support and professional development. Tank's brief remarks during the farewell gathering emphasized Chen's exemplary performance and the pride he felt in having contributed to her preparation. Tank noted that Chen's success would honor both her individual efforts and the unit's commitment to developing exceptional soldiers for service at the highest levels of the military. 6 months after Private Chen departed for Special Forces assessment and selection, Tank received an unexpected phone call that would profoundly impact his understanding of leadership, training, and the unpredictable nature of military careers. The call came from Captain Morrison, who had been monitoring Chen's progress through official channels and wanted to share developments that would affect both Chen's future and Tank's reputation as a trainer. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I have some significant news about Private Chen's performance during Special Forces selection, Captain Morrison began, his tone carrying an unusual mixture of pride and surprise. She not only completed the course successfully, but she finished in the top 5% of candidates and received commendation from the selection cadre for exceptional performance under pressure. Tank felt a surge of pride and satisfaction at this news. Chen's success validated the training modifications Tank had implemented and confirmed his assessment of her potential for elite military service. More importantly, her achievement reflected positively on the unit's ability to prepare soldiers for the most demanding challenges the Army could offer. Captain Morrison continued with additional details about Chen's selection performance that highlighted specific areas where Tank's training had contributed to her success. The selection cadre had noted Chen's exceptional physical conditioning, advanced tactical decision-making abilities, and remarkable composure during high-stress scenarios. These were precisely the areas Tank had emphasized during their supplementary training sessions. The selection instructors specifically mentioned Chen's hand-to-hand combat skills and her ability to teach those skills to other candidates during team exercises, Morrison explained. They noted that her previous training had prepared her not just to perform individually, but to enhance the capabilities of entire teams through knowledge sharing and leadership. Tank reflected on the irony of Chen's martial arts background. The same skills that had initially skeptical about had become major assets during Special Forces selection. Her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training had provided exactly the kind of problem-solving under pressure and physical confidence that Special Forces operations required. Morrison's next revelation was even more significant for Tank's own career development. Chen specifically mentioned your mentoring and modified training program in her post-selection interview. The Special Forces Command is interested in discussing your training methods and potentially incorporating some of your approaches into their candidate preparation programs. Tank had never considered that his individual training modifications might have applications beyond preparing a single soldier for selection. The prospect of contributing to Special Forces training programs represented an opportunity to impact military readiness at a much broader level while advancing his own professional development. The conversation with Captain Morrison concluded with an invitation for Tank to attend a training conference where he would present his modified preparation methods to Special Forces instructors and other military training professionals. This opportunity represented recognition of Tank's innovation and effectiveness as a trainer, opening possibilities for advancement and expanded responsibility. Over the following weeks, Tank prepared for the training conference while continuing his regular duties with new soldier development. The conference presentation would require Tank to analyze and articulate the specific modifications he had made to Chen's training program and explain how those modifications could be applied to other candidates. Tank's preparation for the conference forced him to systematically review his approach to training and identify the key elements that had contributed to Chen's success. He realized that the most important modifications hadn't been specific exercises or techniques, but rather his willingness to adapt standard training to accommodate individual strengths and backgrounds. Tank's presentation at the training conference focused on the importance of recognizing and leveraging diverse civilian backgrounds when preparing soldiers for elite military service. He emphasized that Chen's martial arts training hadn't needed to be replaced with military techniques. Instead, it had provided a foundation that enhanced her military skill development. The conference attendees included Special Forces instructors, conventional unit trainers, and military education specialists from throughout the Army. Tank's presentation generated significant interest and discussion, particularly regarding methods for identifying and developing soldiers with exceptional potential for elite unit service. Tank's conference presentation led to unexpected opportunities for professional development and career advancement. Special Forces Command offered Tank a position as an instructor in their candidate preparation program, while conventional units requested his assistance in developing enhanced training programs for high-potential soldiers. Tank ultimately decided to accept a position as a Special Forces preparation instructor, recognizing that this role would allow him to impact military readiness at a broader level while continuing his own professional growth. The position required additional training and certification, but it represented the kind of career advancement Tank had always hoped to achieve. Tank's transition to Special Forces training brought him into contact with Chen again, now Specialist Chen, and successfully completing the Special Forces qualification course. Their reunion was marked by mutual respect and acknowledgement of how their initial encounter had led to unexpected growth for both of them. Chen's success in Special Forces training had exceeded even Tank's optimistic expectations. She had been selected for additional specialized training in language and cultural skills, preparing her for deployment to regions where Special Forces teams worked closely with foreign military partners. Her martial arts background had proven valuable for teaching close-quarters combat skills to local forces. Tank's new role as a Special Forces preparation instructor allowed him to apply lessons learned from Chen's training to a broader population of candidates. He developed systematic approaches for identifying soldiers with diverse civilian backgrounds who might excel in Special Forces operations, moving beyond traditional selection criteria to recognize unconventional qualifications. Tank's modified training approaches proved effective with multiple candidates, leading to improved selection success rates and recognition from Special Forces leadership. The program Tank developed became a model for other military training commands seeking to maximize the potential of soldiers with diverse backgrounds and experiences. The success of Tank's training innovations led to opportunities for further professional development and advancement within the Special Forces community. Tank was selected for instructor certification in multiple specialized areas and eventually became responsible for developing training programs for other instructors throughout the Special Forces Command. Tank's career trajectory illustrated the unexpected ways that individual encounters could lead to broader organizational change and professional growth. His initial skepticism about Chen's civilian background had been transformed into systematic appreciation for the value of diverse experiences in military training and operations. Tank's relationship with Chen evolved into a professional mentorship that continued throughout their overlapping careers in Special Forces. Chen's continued success and advancement validated Tank's training approaches while providing feedback for ongoing program improvements and refinements. Tank regularly shared Chen's story with new candidates and fellow instructors as an example of the importance of keeping an open mind about potential and the value of adapting training approaches to leverage individual strengths. The story became part of Tank's standard presentation materials for training conferences and professional development sessions. Tank's experience with Chen fundamentally changed his approach to leadership and soldier development throughout the rest of his military career. He became known for his ability to identify potential in unconventional candidates and develop training approaches that maximized individual capabilities while meeting organizational requirements. Tank's military service concluded with recognition as one of the Army's most innovative and effective training developers, with multiple awards and commendations acknowledging his contributions to Special Forces readiness and broader military training programs. His career became a model for the kind of adaptive leadership the modern Army needed to maximize the potential of its diverse soldier population. Tank's post-military career included consulting work with law enforcement and private security organizations seeking to apply military training principles to civilian applications. His expertise in adapting training approaches to diverse backgrounds proved valuable in these civilian contexts as well. Tank maintained contact with Chen throughout her military career, which included multiple deployments and advancement to senior leadership positions within Special Forces. Chen's continued success provided ongoing validation of Tank's training approaches while demonstrating the long-term impact that effective mentoring could have on individual careers. Chen's military career included recognition as one of the Army's most effective Special Forces operators, with multiple awards for combat performance and leadership under extreme conditions. Her success in operations around the world demonstrated the practical value of the training foundations Tank had helped establish early in her career. Tank's legacy as a trainer and leader was built on his willingness to challenge his own assumptions and adapt his approaches based on evidence rather than prejudice. His experience with Chen became a defining example of how effective leadership required continuous learning and willingness to change established practices when better approaches were identified. Tank's story became part of military leadership training programs as an example of how individual encounters could lead to broader organizational improvements when leaders remained open to learning from unexpected sources. Military academies and professional development schools use Tank's experience to illustrate the importance of adaptive leadership in modern military operations. Tank's final reflection on his experience with Chen emphasized the unpredictable nature of military service and the importance of treating every soldier encounter as an opportunity for mutual learning and development. Tank believed that his willingness to learn from Chen had made him a more effective leader and contributed to broader improvements in military training effectiveness. Tank's career demonstrated that effective military leadership required balancing respect for tradition and established practices with openness to innovation and adaptation. His experience showed that the most effective leaders were those who could recognize when existing approaches needed modification and had the courage to implement necessary changes. Tank's influence on military training extended far beyond his direct interactions with individual soldiers. The training programs he developed based on lessons learned from Chen's preparation influenced thousands of military personnel and contributed to improved readiness across multiple units and commands throughout the Army. The relationship between Tank and Chen illustrated the potential for individual encounters to create lasting positive change when both parties approached their interaction with respect, professionalism, and willingness to learn. Their story became an inspiration for military personnel seeking to maximize their own potential while contributing to the development of others. Tank's transformation from skeptical supervisor to innovative trainer demonstrated that personal and professional growth could occur at any stage of a military career when individuals remained committed to continuous improvement and open to learning from diverse sources. His experience proved that effective leadership required both confidence in established principles and flexibility in applying those principles to new situations. Tank's career concluded with deep satisfaction in having contributed to military readiness while growing personally and professionally through his interactions with exceptional soldiers like Chen. His legacy included both the specific improvements he made to training programs and the broader example he provided of adaptive, learning-focused leadership in challenging organizational environments.